This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The local impact of major changes in federal crime-fighting efforts. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We're joined tonight by Amy Weirich, Shelby County District Attorney. Thank you for being here.
Sure.
Also Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And Ed Stanton, U.S. Attorney. Thank you very much. Thank you both for being here. We're going to start with the changes announced by Eric Holder, Attorney General for the U.S., that changed a whole lot of things. And there are details about it that we'll get into, but there was a philosophical shift that is starting with the Attorney General. Tell us what those changes were that were announced just a week or two ago,
Sure.
And then we'll get into the local impact and so on.
Sure. Earlier this month, U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder launched an initiative called Smart on Crime initiative. And in a memo to all of the 93 U.S. attorneys across the country, just a recalibrated approach of how we are prosecuting cases, particularly those with low-level nonviolent drug offenders, as well as what we're doing from a standpoint of reentry, drug courts, and even diversion being used in the federal system. The basis for this I guess, refresh of a look was looking back over the last 3 decades, last 30 years. The incarceration rates are up nearly 800%. I think fiscal year 2011, 2010, the criminal justice system spent upward of $80 billion.
Is that the federal or is that the whole?
Overall. And
Yeah.
so taking a new and a fresh look and understanding that one size doesn't fit all. And so that was the basis. But I think it's worth noting, Eric, what this is not. And just to assure
Sure.
the public and the citizens here throughout West Tennessee, this is not a free pass for anyone to get out of jail or the floodgates will open. I'm happy to say that a number of the initiatives that the Attorney General has launched in this and asked us to take a look at, we're already doing a lot of proactive, progressive
Right.
measures, working very closely with our state and local counterparts in OWARC.
Right.
And so a number of those items we're doing, and again, the worst of the worst will still be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, particularly on the federal side where there's no parole.
And I looked at just some numbers from, I think it's about 1980 to now. The federal population of prisoners went from some 20,000 to 210, 220,000. I mean, it's a huge increase. The federal population of prisoners is 10% of the overall, but still, I guess you all have big influence, and maybe when we'll get into this with Amy here about whether local and state governments follow your lead. Part of this, and you started to address it, is that notion, and I can remember when on a national level people tried to pillory Bill Clinton and Dukakis and everybody soft on crime. That was the big, in the same way that federal politics now is driven by terrorism, it used to be driven by, I can remember, being soft on crime. And I imagine on some level people look at this and say, wait, you're being soft on crime. Why we should throw everybody in jail if they violated the law. We shouldn't, all this diversion shouldn't happen, these other outcomes. Why is that not being soft on crime?
Well, I think it's still being hard on crime, but I think as the title of the initiative, Smart on Crime, and an understanding that the statistics show we can't lock our way up out of the criminal element that we have here. A number of individuals have substance abuse problems, mental challenges, and so before making those charging decisions, doing something that we're already doing every week with Amy's office, that we're sitting down, we're looking to see which individuals we should take on the state side, on the federal side, which ones does it make sense. But also understanding the recidivism rate, that locking folks up for a long time has not necessarily proven to be the ultimate decision of what's going to make people get on the right track. And so when we look at typically more individuals that go in will come back and be a recidivist, which also means a couple of things. One, they come back into the system, we have to pay, obviously, taxpayers, but when someone comes back into the system, that also means typically they victimized another citizen, or they've done something to offend the laws, and so you have victims, obviously you have the recidivist rate. So those are issues of being smart on crime. What can we do to stop that? And I'm happy and pleased that we've launched a reentry court. Judge McCullough, who just switched over from being Chief Judge McCullough to senior status, but he was very instrumental with probation services in launching over in the federal side a reentry court and a drug court.
Right, right. And Amy, we'll bring you in. These rules don't directly affect you. I mean, you're driven by local and state law and so on. But I saw you nodding a lot as Ed was talking, because why is that? Do you think that these have an impact on you indirectly in terms of how you operate, or do you even think the state will eventually kind of follow the lead of the federal government in changing some of these guidelines?
Well, the nodding is just, it's a lot of what they're doing now with Smart on Crime, or going to start doing, are things we've already been doing in the state system. When you say diversion, drug court, and reentry, those are three words that float around 201 Poplar on a daily basis. We have Judge Dwyer in Division 8 and a drug court treatment program, have had it for years. We offer diversion every day for countless offenders. And reentry is something that on the state side, with our friends and partners at Operation Safe Community and Mayor Luttrell's office, that we're working on. So no, it doesn't impact us. I guess we on the state side of the prosecution world found it kind of, I guess, ironic that he would make comments that we're not going to go after low-level drug offenders, because quite honestly, they're not doing it now. The low-level drug offenders, working in cooperation with Ed Stanton's office, those are the ones we prosecute. And even on the state side, we're not locking up low-level drug offenders for years and years and years in the penal farm or in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. A lot of those are on diversion or given misdemeanor citations and paying a fine and run through the system.
Right, and to that question, I'm soft on crime. I mean, crime is a big issue locally. It's a big issue nationally, but it's an issue locally. A lot of concern about crime. Violent crime is down, I think, over a 5-year period. Although people don't necessarily register that, sometimes because of folks in the media who, hype last night's murder or last night's kind of horror.
Sure.
But for those people who maybe hear what you're saying and think, look, you're just being soft on those people. I mean, that low-level drug offender may have, they're going to go on to steal a car and break into a house and do these other things. This diversion or all these are I'm just being, the other point of view, these are just ways to not punish them because we're stretched too thin.
Well, and drug court is a good example of that. It does no good for the community that we serve to send a drug addict out to the penal farm to do 9 months for breaking into cars, breaking into homes, to feed his or her drug habit. Because when they get out, if we've not addressed that habit, they're going to go back and re-victimize. They're going to make another victim out of some homeowner or business owner in our community. Now, being on diversion, going through the drug court treatment program, it's not a walk in the park. It's a difficult, tough program. But if you can make it through, the numbers show that you are less likely to reoffend, and that's a good day for everybody.
Bill.
I've actually seen the reentry court work when Judge Donald was a district judge on the federal side, and it's not a walk in the park. In some ways, it seems as if it might have been easier for someone who had been sentenced before, because they were sentenced, they did their time, they were out, and that was it. Now on supervised release, they still have to show up before a federal judge and talk about what they've done, the steps they've taken on that. How much is that a part of your office's consideration when you are kind of looking at how the process works beyond prosecuting a case? Do you have to think about the steps beyond prosecuting the case?
It's a part, Bill, and that's a great point. But it's more so, and you're absolutely right, the way that our reentry court is set up on the federal side is that the inmates, the offenders, they actually have some skin in the game. So it's voluntary. It's something that they sign up for. You're right, it's not a walk in the park, but it's a scenario where you have not only the prosecutors, typically the probation services, you have even the federal public defenders and the court all rooting for these individuals, say, we don't want to see you again. And these are the things, if you're willing to abide by the rules, these are extra steps that you'll have to take, as you mentioned, on supervised release and coming before the court. But we're trying to put you on the right trajectory of being successful and not coming back through the system. And so it's something that's worked. It's something that it's not for everyone. Obviously, the more violent offenders and those that have a longer criminal history, it's typically not something that they're eligible for. But those individuals that deserve that second chance, who've paid their debt, It's a enormous win when everyone is rallying behind them and wanting them to succeed. And we've had some, there's a graduation. We've had some success stories, and not only that, at the graduations of this reentry court, we have individuals, family members, members of the clergy, community leaders, all rallying behind these individuals, hoping that again, they'll be successful and not be a recidivist. And we found some great successes there.
At 201 Poplar, we not only have a drug court, we now have a veterans court
Right.
as well. I covered a candidate who ran for one of the judicial positions who advocated a mental health type court. Do you think our court system is moving toward that approach where it can? I mean, obviously those kind of courts, not everybody's going to fit into one of those courts, but is that a bigger change in how our courts handle it?
Sure.
As well.
And I think that will be the next big conversation that you hear is the mental health, because so much of what we deal with at 201 Poplar and in juvenile court has to do and is connected to mental health issues. 201 Poplar is not a place for somebody who is a mental health victim to spend too much time. And so working with the Public Defender's Office and Jericho Project, which was created years ago, to make sure we're getting those people out of the jail if that's what is the best thing to do, and getting them the treatment they need, that's the challenge. But yes, I think that mental health focus will be the next wave.
You're both part of Operation Safe Community. What does this shift at the federal level, which has already been underway here on both the federal and state level, what does it mean for what's been called the broken windows theory of law enforcement?
Well, I think it's just that we've got to start looking outside of the way, when I started as a prosecutor 22 years ago, our office was basically enforcement, and that was it. Now you hear prosecutors, you see the work that we do on a daily basis focused just as much in the areas of prevention and intervention, because we're not going to arrest and prosecute our way out. So the broken windows, getting back to the theory of neighborhoods, making sure that we are addressing what are sometimes called the more minor crimes, but they have a great impact on the safety and how people feel about their community. And that having those good relationships with law enforcement, trusting law enforcement, goes a long way in helping all of us keep the crime numbers down.
And I'll do in layman's terms, broken windows was the theory. It kind of came out of New York, or New York made it famous, I guess, that, a broken window isn't the same as a murder, but that broken window, one, makes people feel bad about where they live, feel unsafe about where they live, and that person who breaks a window is more apt, if they're not stopped,
Right.
to then break into a car and then break into a house and go down this road. Is that right?
And you can see the whole succession, particularly when you look at a juvenile offender's record. We get them on a murder case, but when you look back through their juvenile crime record, it starts with the truancy, it starts with the broken window, the disorderly conduct, the fight at school, the bringing the gun to school, and now here we've got a murder.
And so is in terms of these changes, again, at the federal level, but we're talking about how Memphis, federal, local, has embraced these over the years, is it not so much that at that early stage in that scenario you just described, it's not that the courts don't step in, it's just not jail time. I mean, that's fundamentally what it's about, because you still want to try to interrupt that path.
Sure.
Exactly.
And sometimes it is jail time, but it's also why you see us use our nuisance power a lot to shut down some of these blighted properties, to shut down that home that becomes the stash house for the gang members to hide their guns, to sell the drugs,
Right.
to work the prostitutes, whatever. The nuisance action is a big part of that.
And I think another good example is the DMI, the Drug Market Intervention project that we have. We work closely with Amy's office, and again, where we have low-level offenders, drug offenders who's actually in neighborhoods selling drugs on the corners, we have them on videotape. And ready to indict and proceed with charges, but we bring them in if they don't have a history or record, if this is their first time, and say, hey, this is where you're headed. Again, tie-ins, as Amy mentioned, from the religious and civic and family community of these individuals. They're watching this and saying, hey, you deserve a second chance, we're going to fight for you, but if you don't, if you violate, if this is your second time around, this is where you're headed. And so again, being able to do prevention early on the front end makes a huge difference. We found a number of successes in that regard.
When you talk about drug market, some of the rise, and forgive me if I simplify this, but some of the rise in the federal prison population was a response to the crack epidemic and really tough sentences, mandatory sentences that were put in maybe the 90s, that even small possession, selling a small amount, had to go to jail for 5 years. Looking back, that's part of what Eric Holder, your office, is trying to avoid, that automatic kicking in, possession of crack automatically puts someone in jail for 5 years?
Right, that's exactly right. And what Attorney General Holder's asked is before we need to take a strong look at how we're indicting cases, particularly with the mandatory minimums of sometimes as high as 5, 10, 15 years to life, depending on the amount. Now, it needs to be clear that these cases are not to be confused with when there are ties to gangs, when there are minors involved, violence involved, when you have career offenders. Absolutely will remain vigilant in prosecuting these individuals. But again, it's the low-level, non-violent offenders that the Attorney General has made clear that we need to be very deliberate about how we're charging on the federal side.
And one more question, and this is maybe almost obvious, but I just want to put it out there. Part of what you're saying is that jail's not a deterrent, right? That jail time alone is not enough of a deterrent for people.
Well, I guess what I would say is it depends, and it's on a case.
I mean, it is for me. I don't want to be real clear about that. But it seems like that's part of what you're talking about. That putting somebody in the penal farm, putting somebody in, it just doesn't make sense, and that's not the right way to go.
Well, and I think the answer to that is, as I mentioned earlier, one size doesn't fit all. If anything we've learned over the last 30 years is that just locking people up is not the answer.
Right.
And so with every case, and I'm happy to say that that's what we're doing on a case-by-case basis. We determine which court, which system these matters should be indicted. It's
also much more expensive, right, to put someone in jail.
Sure.
I mean, and is that a reality you are forced to look at, or that you embrace? That I, as a public official, you're gonna spend some of the taxpayers' money on diversion or whatever, or a lot of them locking it up. Is that part of your calculation or not? The expense of it?
It's a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
I won't say that the expense is driving. It's really the actual underlying defense, the defendant, the history.
Right.
Is this a very violent individual? Is this someone that really needs substance abuse issues addressed, mental issues, someone that deserves a second chance, who's proven that they deserve a second chance, and if not, again,
Right, and I bring up the expense part, and maybe that's more of a legislative thing. And you see certain states, and real conservative states, Oklahoma, Texas, Georgia, have gone through this process of saying, look, we're spending so much money on jails, it's not working, and so they are leading the charge in some ways at a state level of putting these kind of programs we're talking about in place. So I suppose you guys, as you're the enforcers, you don't have to deal with those issues. But have you seen on the state level, is there any notion among your peer district attorneys or among legislators you talk about, governor's office, to kind of go in that direction from a state point of view, that it's so expensive to house these people, and in general, it's been too expensive and not very effective?
Well, sure. I mean, I think we have to, as public servants, be good stewards of the taxpayers' money. And so while it is not a driving factor when we're sitting down trying to decide how to handle a case, it is a factor when you go to the legislature and say, hey, we need tougher sentencing laws in this area. Often, the first thing they're going to do is look at the fiscal note. What is that going to cost us? And so that kind of begins the process of the negotiation and the bartering. And all right, we realize this is what the prosecutors would like, but how can we maybe make it a little more economically feasible and still get the same job done for the community?
And do you see, I'll put you on the spot, do you see in the Tennessee legislature, very Republican-dominated, stereotypically, tough on crime folks, do you see them being open to more diversion and alternate means other than jail? I mean, is the legislature open to that, or do you get a lot of people saying, no, we just want to lock them up and throw away the key?
No, it's a good mix of kind of realizing that oftentimes incarceration does not solve the problem. But with the worst of the worst, with the most violent offenders, those are the ones that the community wants off the street. And we've come a long way in toughening our state laws. Every week, as Ed said, our prosecutors and law enforcement sit at a table and review every arrest where a gun has been confiscated in Shelby County.
Yeah.
And it used to be that some of the worst always went federal because that was where we could get the tougher sentencing. Our state laws have caught up a lot in the last couple of years. And so now there's a good mix of the pile that goes stateside is a little bit bigger after those meetings than it would have been 5 years ago.
Okay. Bill.
I want to kind of go broader because we've talked about the decisions you both make as prosecutors. Should we as a society be rethinking the way our prisons operate and the philosophy under which they operate.
What do you mean?
In terms of, we've talked a lot about how for some offenders, sending them to prison for a long time doesn't really help them.
Deter and help.
Yeah, in fact, it might even make them worse when
You
they
know,
come out.
it's interesting because we, as I mentioned, Mayor's Office and Board of Probation and Parole and Operation Safe Community started this reentry program where we're looking at a study group of male inmates and female inmates and offering them an opportunity to start getting some training while they're incarcerated instead of just opening the doors to the prison and saying, you know, good luck to you. We're working with them while they're there. And what's been one of the challenges is getting the offenders to want to participate in that program, because so often the response is, I just want to flatten my time. I don't want to be on paper. The mentality being, just let me stay in prison a little bit longer, but I don't want to be a part of that program. I don't want anybody watching what I do, even if it means I get to get out sooner. So that's a philosophy change that has to occur, and I don't know how you go about doing that, but getting people to want to participate and better their life when they get out.
Ed, I've seen some federal offenders who couldn't wait to get into the main population from the places like Mason, Tennessee. They just wanted to get into that routine. Do our federal prisons need to change the way that they operate?
I think it's worth taking a look, and I think that goes back to Eric Holder's notion of being smart on crime. I mean, when we look at what we've done and the approach we've taken over the last 2-3 decades, I think there's some tweaking that needs to happen, and understanding that just locking individuals up and housing them there, it's proven that with the recidivism rate that it's not completely effective. And so looking at how we charge, what we charge, and where we send individuals, whether or not probation, again, for low-level offenders, is a better use of resources. I think roughly $7, a little over $7.77 per day is what it costs on probation, supervised release rather, and over $70 a day per inmate to be housed. And so we look at just the best allocation of resources, but more importantly, the most effective allocation.
If we see the crime numbers hit a bump and go up, do you think there will be political pressure to abandon this?
We'll see. I mean, I'm sure the winds blow both ways, but that doesn't deter the job that we have. We don't base our decisions on politics, but based on the law and what's in the best interest of the community and making sure our citizens remain safe. That will remain a priority.
Do you see a need? Part of what the Attorney General Eric Holder is doing is what I would call new guidelines within the existing laws. There was no passage of a new crime bill by the Congress. This is just working within the system as it's set up differently. Would you like to see? I mean, the Congress come forward with some changes in law about sentencing and so on and so forth. Would that make your job easier and more effective?
Well, I mean, that's a question that only Congress can answer. I mean, I'm charged with obviously enforcing the laws that are legislated on the books. But I do think that this approach is, and you're right, this was no act. It was pretty much a memo sent to all the U.S. attorneys from the Attorney General. But it's somewhat of an easy transition for us, as I mentioned earlier, because many of the things we're already doing, and we've been very successful with working with Amy and her office.
Just a couple of minutes left. Amy, you mentioned going to Nashville and the sentencing laws about guns changing. Is there the legislative session is 3-4 months away.
Right.
Will you be up there, and what will you be lobbying for or asking for as you look ahead to that session?
There was some measures that we started the conversation on last year that we need to carry through this year, having to do with making tougher sentences for some child abuse issues and for violent crimes, and then also looking at what we can do to make sure that drugs and DUI and those types of legislative issues are shored up and as strong as they can be. Prescription drug abuse, you'll hear a lot about that because it's It's
It's in the number 2 killer of
Number one
kids.
killer of
Number 1
kids
killer.
today
It's
in
the
the
number
state of
2
Tennessee.
abused nationally. I mean, it's
Yes.
a phenomenon that we in the media probably haven't covered enough. That
Yeah.
we focus on crack, cocaine, we focus on certain things. It's the pills in people's drawers that are killing people.
right. And then the other problem that comes from that are the number of babies being born addicted to drugs, and those numbers are up. The last time I
Right.
looked, the count was at 440
Right.
babies born with neonatal abstinence syndrome statewide.
It's tragic.
And we'll all be paying for that for generations to come, and we've got to get a handle on it.
And with just a minute and a half left, let me ask you, I can't help but ask, the sequester. It must have hit your office.
Absolutely. Hiring freeze, sequester, very tough times of austerity in our office. And again, we're charged with being on the front lines of making sure that our community stays safe. But I will tell you, the men and women who comprise the U.S. Attorney's Office between Memphis and Jackson in our offices doing a great job. We're having to do more with less. Our numbers are still right along. In fact, we're above where we've been in the last few years with less resources. But it's something we'll continue to fight with everything we have, notwithstanding sequester.
Okay. Bill, last question. We just 30 seconds left here.
James Coleman, when he ran the county jail, talked about the drug program that was there, and he talked about how exemplary it was. But then he lamented the fact that once prisoners left, they couldn't get that. That seems to be kind of the flip side of what we've been talking about here, that you have that kind of program in prison, but then outside of the county jail, it doesn't exist.
Right, and I think we are getting better. I mean, I think you see more private industry coming to the table and saying, look, we're a part of this problem as well. Let us be part of the solution. How can we help? But yes, the drug program at the penal farm is one of the best. The problem is you've got a waiting list to get into it as well, and oftentimes
All right.
they do their time before they can get into it.
We're going to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Bill. And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.